As a fan of gaming, one of my favorite genres has to be survival horror, specifically the classic survival horrors of old, such as Silent Hill for the PS1, its sequel Silent Hill 2 for the PS2, Resident Evil Remake on the GameCube, and many more. These games and their concepts defined horror in gaming culture. However, in recent years, there has been a resurgence of horror in gaming that has brought up the likes of Outlast, Resident Evil 7, and even reimagined classics like Resident Evil 2 Remake, to name a few. These have created a new set of standards in the genre that shake old traditions off and add new layers to the survival horror experience. Retro games in the genre created the feeling of dread in most players by implementing many techniques designed to simulate the feeling of uncertainty and instilling the element of the unknown in every corner taken within the world being explored. Linear and limited exploration allows the developer to control the pace and dictate the order of the events that will inevitably lead to a feeling of hopelessness in the players as we have to keep pushing forward. Tight closed corridors accompanied with a well-placed static camera help create a feeling of powerlessness, as the ability to control your surroundings is taken from you by restricting your vision to a specific shot. Awkward and obtuse angles manage to disorient your mind as your brain is not accustomed to the asymmetrical world being translated from your eyes to your brain. The short quantities of resources, or lack thereof, weigh heavy on your subconscious as a gamer, eventually causing a level of anxiety that can only be relieved when your desire to find more resources is quenched by the developer when a well-placed pack of bullets is found just when you were running out of ammo. This feeling of relief is fleeting, however, as the cycle starts all over in the next room. I am of course describing the games I was familiar with. I truly believed that in order for a horror game to retain my interest, it had to have what are now considered old game design concepts: still closed corridors, static camera angles, obstruction of vision, and third-person perspective. Due to hardware limitations, games back in the day relied on these concepts and many other clever tricks to convey the idea of horror. This worked well and conditioned my brain to expect every horror game to contain the same elements. When I had my first experience with Outlast, I discovered that the first-person perspective enhanced the immersion by placing me in the world and closer to the objects within it, while stripping familiar defensive mechanics such as weapons or healing items. Resident Evil 7 further proved the effectiveness of this concept by giving me limited resources and familiar exploration while keeping the first-person perspective and tight closed spaces. Resident Evil 2 Remake broke the traditional static camera angles Capcom was known for while utilizing lighting to create the feeling of despair and fear, blending old-school tight spaces with new free-range cameras to control your line of sight. Evolving old concepts and leaving the comfort zone of past established norms can be a risk leading to failure. However, risks can also bring rewards. No. Resident Evil Village is the latest installment in the series. The game expanded the world of the series while keeping the first-person perspective and low resources throughout its runtime. Claustrophobic corridors but varied environments helped realize the true vision the developers had in mind for the game. Whether the horror comes from a more traditional retro era or lies closer to the contemporary designs of today's gaming conventions, there is an unmatched feeling of accomplishment when you complete your journey through a world designed to keep you on your toes with fear while limiting your resources for the entirety of the road.
You'll never see your rose again!
Resident Evil Village's story follows the same formula Capcom is known for. It is easy to predict, convoluted at times, but also intriguing. It's just enough to keep you interested and keep you moving forward. The story starts off with baby story time, followed by Chris Redfield abruptly interrupting the night and busting through the door without knocking. shooting Mia, knocking Ethan out, and kidnapping your baby Rose. Ethan wakes up on an empty snowy road next to the crashed convoy he was being transported in. Slowly but surely, Ethan advances towards a cabin. I have to mention that the tension the game builds during this segment really sets the atmosphere and the mood for the rest of the game, as it is clearly making this statement that you are now alone in an unknown place with no one nearby to help you. The sound design also takes a front seat, as the sounds of crows and even subtle sounds in the distance really convey the feeling of an open and vast area that can inhabit any type of creatures, even if this is just a linear path. The game manages to keep a balanced sound design due to the well-implemented dynamic sounds of wildlife even within a quiet ambiance. The moment I reached the village, the scope of the game sparked my sense of wonder and exploration, as I was eager to see all there was to discover within it. This is the first time a mainline Resident Evil has given me the feeling of freedom and the will to explore at this scale. This is also when you realize how much Resident Evil Village was inspired by Resident Evil 4.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
From the art direction, to the item management system, to the vendor of the game.
Welcome. What are you buying?
It almost feels as if this was the true vision for Resident Evil 4 packaged for the current era. Ethan is the returning protagonist from Resident Evil 7. Ethan was never a fully fledged character or deep by any means, and at points he was even devoid of any likable characteristics. This changed in Resident Evil Village. Ethan has been given more dialogue, making him slightly more likable than in the previous entry. However, he still has some pretty ridiculous lines at times that will make you wonder how is he still alive.
Maybe they're out?
Ethan does not win any awards for his newfound character traits, but it is still nice to have a more contextually active character this time around. After playing for a while, you will find the game becomes more and more linear as you progress, and it reels back the idea of a vast open world for a more reserved and subtle open zone style game. I found this to be a little disappointing, however it was not a deal breaker as the game kept me engaged with its gameplay features and story throughout. The controls are tight and responsive like any first person shooter should be. With a clean interface and smooth animations, the game feels excellent in your hands. In the world of Resident Evil Village, you will be facing a wide variety of enemies such as this elusive werewolf type that will for sure make you waste ammo while it roams about many areas of the village, or this zombie-like creatures stalking you in the castle. You will also be facing more formidable enemies that will in a way act like mini-bosses. These are optional challenges that will pose a high risk, however they will also yield high rewards when defeated. Aside of the main campaign bosses, the variety in the enemies keep the game challenging and most importantly, fun. Now back to the story for a moment. Shortly after you explore the village and move on, you will meet an intriguing cast of antagonists with their own unique abilities and areas to explore. Mother Miranda, Lady Dimitrescu and her three daughters, Heisenberg, Salvatore Morao, and Donna Beneviento, each one controlling a different area in the game with their own mechanics and gimmicks. The synopsis of the story revolves around Miranda's plans with Ethan's daughter Rose and Ethan's quest to rescue Rose. We have a motivation and a goal. That is what the story offers. No surprises along the way, just a hero on a quest to save his daughter. There are some escalations, but again, nothing out of the Resident Evil world that has not been seen before. Along your journey, you'll also meet the Duke, a traveling merchant with a unique personality.
I've been waiting for you, Mr. Winters.
How do you know my name?
Anyone who is anyone has heard of the likes of you. A hero searching for his daughter.
Developed in the RE engine, the game looks phenomenal and I never had a problem with the performance nor the pacing of the action or the story. Aside of the wide variety of enemies the game introduces, it'll also take you to different areas throughout its runtime. The castle section is controlled by the Dimitrescu family. It's really reminiscent of the Spencer Mansion with its layers and secret rooms. You spend a good portion of the game here. You also meet the Stalker family of vampires, Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters.
Man blood.
The claustrophobic halls, yet beautifully crafted areas are both terrifying and marvelous to wander about, but the fact that you have a family of vampires after you gives you the sense of urgency that forces you to stay on the move at all times. That is of course until you figure out that the Dimitrescu family cannot enter safe rooms. As wonderful as the castle section is, it is just a section and it suffers because of this. Because the game does not fully focus on the castle, its commitment to a better layout and puzzles within the castle are lacking in comparison to the Spencer Mansion. However, the castle manages to stand out on its own because of its beautiful architecture, compelling enemies, and a specific puzzle involving fire later within it. Think of it as a bite-sized Spencer Mansion for those of you who know of it, and for those of you who don't, the castle will be a joy to explore regardless. Even though the story is simple, it has enough moments of action and suspense to keep you engaged and wanting more. For example, this being a survival horror game, it offers plenty of moments where you will feel weak and helpless, but never more so than the section controlled by Donna Beneviento. The build up to her section was great, and the feeling of panic I got from the moment I was left alone in her home induced so much anxiety in me that I was left wondering why the rest of the game failed to ever reach the same level of fear and horror as this section did. There are other memorable moments, but never like the one in Donna Beneviento's home, as her section truly harkens back at the horror genre of old, where you are truly helpless and stripped of many items that can provide a sense of security and safety. Playing above normal difficulty will warrant better experiences, as the scarcity of items and diverse enemy placement can truly create a high level of replayability, especially when the items and weapons you gathered in previous playthroughs carries over no matter the difficulty level you select on subsequent play sessions. Not only did Resident Evil 4 inspired Resident Evil Village's art direction, but it also inspired the weapon upgrade system as well. You will collect currency used to upgrade the damage, ammo capacity, and other stats for most weapons. The Duke takes care of all of your purchasing needs. He will sell all sorts of items, from healing to weapons to crafting recipes for ammo. In a brief change of pace for the series, you will find farm and wild animals you can hunt, which will drop meat in order for the Duke to cook and prepare a meal that will permanently increase your stats. This is a change I do not believe the series needed, but it does give you an extra mechanic and activity to focus on if you ever need to slow down and do something else in the game. You will also find collectibles like these breakable wooden goats and your traditional files as another side activity to build lore. When you are focused on the main campaign, the game excels at making you feel involved because of the well-paced progression system that makes you feel stronger every time you overcome an area. With this comes the feeling of satisfaction, but at the same time, the fear effect that you once had at the beginning of the game starts to become more and more obsolete, as with great power comes less and less fear. Later in the game, Capcom loses the sense and essence of the horror and starts to instead make use of action more frequently. This is something they avoided for the most part in Resident Evil 7. However, with this entry, they went the route of 2/3 survival horror and 1/3 action first-person shooter. This happens in the latter half of the game, which happens to house some of the most annoying and at times toughest enemies. The game manages to stay committed to scarcity with its resources in the lated areas, but the amount of already gathered resources throughout the game might counter this issue. The dark and narrow areas in the game are very effective at conveying the sense of claustrophobic anxiety and at times even terror, as the level of visibility can be very minimal and the feeling of something lurking in the shadows can be daunting. Some enemies may be annoying to deal with by design. Some areas can also be underwhelming when you have experienced the most memorable ones early in the game. And the deviation from horror to the more action-oriented experience in the later half can instill some disappointment in those looking for a horror-only experience. However, with amazing visuals, fun gameplay mechanics, and a more open zone-oriented design, Resident Evil Village is easily one of my favorite Resident Evil games in the series, as it still captures the sense of dread and fear for most of its runtime while keeping me engaged with its varied enemy encounters and fun mechanics.